All right, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. Now that the offseason, for all intents and purposes, is behind us, we're getting closer into OTA season. We've already been through rookie minicamps. So we're starting to see what the Seahawks are going to look like for 2025 with all the new additions they've made, the changes they've made across their entire roster. But when you do some deeper digging and look at the data, it's clear the Seahawks have a really smart strategy that they executed on at a very high level. People aren't talking about this, but this is a great sign for the Seahawks future, both in the short term and the long term. We'll get to this report in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick, that is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, when it comes time to this OTA season, right, and rookie minicamp season is the same way. Everyone falls in love with the splashy highlights, the kind of cool anecdotes of rookies and new additions doing great things, and that's really important. We talk about it on this channel all the time, especially when it comes to what coaches and players are saying and doing with these rookies and new additions to a football team. But we all have to remember it's a team, it's a collective effort where it's not just individual players added, it's the individual players added across the entire board, the entire spectrum, rookies, drafted and undrafted, veterans, versus the people that were lost. And if you look at what the Seahawks have done over the course of the entire offseason, it's really clear they executed on a phenomenal strategy. So let's go ahead and pull up our first chart here to really highlight what I'm talking about. So this is, according to overthecamp.com, we compiled the data per their website, the teams that lost the most percentages of their snaps that played in 2024 heading into 2025. You can see by the red arrow there, the Seattle Seahawks lost the fifth most snaps through free agency heading into the draft of any team in the National Football League. About 15% of the snaps, the production of people that played in 2024 are no longer with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, a lot of times teams don't focus on this. They just focus on, well, we lost a receiver, let's pick up a receiver. We lost a corner, let's pick up a corner. But the reality is when you lose experience, you have to try and replace it with experience as best as you can. And it's very rare that teams are able to do this at a high level. But the Seahawks actually pulled off the incredible. Let's go into this next report here, courtesy of PFF, Pro Football Focus. And what PFF did is they looked through each team's draft class and they looked at the number of snaps a team's draft class had in aggregate, adding up all the players that were selected, and they ranked it. And you can see right there on your screen in front of you that the Seattle Seahawks, based on their 11-man draft class, had over 22,970 snaps total experience added to the roster via the draft. It's over 2,000 snaps per draft pick. That is an absolutely bonkers number. And look, this is when you have this kind of performance, this is not something that happens by accident. There are very few teams in the NFL. In fact, I say maybe only one other team in the NFL that executed a even somewhat similar strategy at this level. Everyone always talks about what they need to do through the draft, what they need to do through the offseason, but a lot of teams, they really fail in it. You see teams, I look at last year with the Dallas Cowboys, great example of this. They lost a lot of guys at free agency. They went out and drafted developmental guys in the draft, and the result was a disappointing season, right? We've seen this with the Miami Dolphins a number of times. We see this with the vast majority of the National Football League. You have an offseason where you lose some veterans, you need some experience, but you don't turn to it in the draft. You don't look for other vehicles to maintain that baseline level of performance. John Schneider and the Seattle Seahawks have pulled off an incredible move here. This is absolutely just an awesome job. This is why when people look at what certain teams are doing, the smarter teams in football, you can't just look at individual moves by themselves. You have to look at the entire picture. We've already seen reports about certain rookies. Of course, you look at Milroe, Elijah Roy comes the tight end, comes another guy that comes to mind. A lot of other new additions doing some really great things for Seattle up to this point. Of course, Coach Mike Macdonald heading into year 2. It looks like his plan is slowly coming into place in terms of what kind of team he wants to lead culture and scheme-wise. But when you look at the entire picture of how this roster is constructed, down to the salary cap details, when extensions are due, experience, snaps played, it's clear the Seattle Seahawks, certainly since Mike Macdonald showed up, are executing an effective, smart strategy. They're not just spraying and praying, so to speak. They're executing a plan, and they're doing it at a very high level. And when you have a plan and you're able to follow through with it, like the Seattle Seahawks are doing, usually the results show themselves on the field. A lot of teams, I know it sounds crazy, don't have a plan, or at least don't have a very good one. And even the teams that have a plan, very few of them execute it at a very high level. Because look, it's hard to do, right? This is the National Football League. It's not easy to do. The Seattle Seahawks every step this entire offseason have done a phenomenal job. And when you look at the data, it's very clear that no matter what challenge they're faced with, losing a bunch of snaps, they then immediately remedy the problem in the draft, right? They have to deal with a lot of young guys that are up for extensions in a couple of years. What do? They trade some assets to make sure they can free up the dollars to extend those guys over the next 2 seasons. John Schneider, Mike McDonald, this combination has very quickly become one of the smarter GM head coach combinations in the National Football League, and this latest report is just further proof of that. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Seahawks fans, in the comment section below. Look, of course, anytime you have a busy offseason like Seattle, it can feel like a flurry, right? You got a lot of new guys coming in, whether it's through the draft, undrafted free agents, trades, whatever it may be. Give us the one new Seattle Seahawk that you think no one is talking about. Okay, it could be an undrafted rookie, could be a drafted rookie, could be a veteran free agent, whatever it may be. Give us the one new Seahawks player that you think will have a big impact that no one is talking about. Give us that guy in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. What are your thoughts on this data with Seattle, or just specifically everything going on with the Seahawks right now?
Yeah, Nick, I think when you look at the data that you brought up, it's really interesting because, first of all, to get these players with this many snaps, it takes some doing. You said you have to have a strategy, you have a plan go into place. There's clearly a plan in place for the Seahawks. But one thing I noticed is you look at people with the lowest snaps. That's guys who are in positions that necessarily aren't on the field 100% of the time. You look at the tight end position or the two players that had the lowest amount of snaps. So that makes sense. But one thing I also noticed is the further that you went into the draft, like the later rounds, the 6th and the 7th round, they seem to have prioritized guys with the most snaps. You have the guys in that 6th and 7th round. When you look at tackle, Bryce Cabaldo, his 3,000 plus snaps played. When you look at tackle, Mason Richmond, 3,000 plus snaps played. And you look at wide receiver Ricky White, 2,400 snaps played for him. Those are all guys in the later rounds. So I think it's another interesting strategy that they value the veteranism. They value guys who've played a lot of snaps, which means you had to start a lot of games. You have to have a lot of starting experience. Can't be a bad player if you're starting that many games. And I think that's really important. But I think also going down in the draft, I think to hit in the later rounds of the draft, you have to have a strategy, a modifier that gives you an idea of what makes these guys later in the draft good. Some people draft off of, physical attributes. Is the guy tall? Is he strong? Is he a quick 40? Something like that. Some people draft off of, RAS score. Some people draft off of whatever the case may be. But it seems like what the Seattle Seahawks wanted was guys who had a lot of experience under their belt. Because if we're being honest, 6th, 7th round type of guys, those are guys who are going to be your backups. It's going to be your practice squad guys. It's going to be the depth of the team. And getting depth of the team in there, who's played a lot of snaps, I think that's really important and going to be very beneficial for this Seahawks team going forward. I think that's a really smart move by Schneider and McDonald, just to say, hey, we're bringing in guys, especially like offensive linemen, who are going to come in here. They could be guys that if someone goes down, gets hurt, we have to bring them into the game. Let's have them have 3,000 snaps in college. Let's make them be really veteran players. Let's make them be guys that aren't just walking out onto the field for their first time because they're 6'8", 400-pound, athletic type of freak. Let's get these guys out here that have played a full, long college career, and they're not going to be out of their depth. They're not going to come into this game and feel like, oh man, I have no idea what's going on, because these are guys who have done it over and over and over again and are very comfortable. So I think that's what else I get out of this graphic. That's what I get out of the stats for the Seahawks is they have a great plan. I think replacing, depth of that you lost with similar depth as far as amount of snaps played, a lot about amount as guys that are, familiar with the game is good, but also in the later rounds when you're looking at your backups in your future guys that could come in and help you at some point, you don't want them to be brand new to the game. You don't want them to come in with 600 snaps and be like, I don't know exactly what's going on. It's all new to me. You want a guy who's been around the block, and it seems like that's exactly what the Seattle Seahawks have done here.
Yeah, because it's important to understand when we think of veteran players, we think of usually age or seasons, right? But the reality is we're looking for experience. How much football have you actually played? If you're 26 years old or 31 years old or whatever it may be, but you don't have a lot of actual game reps, are you really a veteran player? In a lot of ways, I would argue not, right? Give me a guy who's played a lot of football, and number one, you can evaluate how good he is, right? You've got a lot of tape on him. You can figure out what he's good at, what he's bad at, what he needs to improve on. But number two, you know he knows how to play the game. He's been in situations. He's been in pressure situations. He's been in games where he's down by 20, in games when he's up by 20, games where the run game's working great, the pass game's not working great, or whatever the case may be. You have experience in those situations. A lot of teams, like you said, they draft a lot for what does he look like in terms of workout stature. They draft for what they think a player could become, and they evaluate and make moves throughout the entire offseason predicated on what they think a player could become. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you completely discount what a player has already done, you usually result in disaster. That's why you have teams like the New York Jets that always seem to struggle, right? If you look at and in fact, even let's throw the Las Vegas Raiders in there for a number of years, of course. The Raiders were famous for this. The Jets did this a lot as well in terms of drafting some physical freak phenom, like you alluded to there, saying, oh, I think he could become this. He could become a big play receiver. He could become a star. He may not have played a lot of football in college. He may not have gotten a lot of starting opportunities, but we think based on some data, some measurables, whatever, his combine performance, he could become a star. The reality is that fails a lot. In fact, it fails the vast majority of the time. This sounds so crazy, but players that play a lot and are good in college usually play a lot and are good in the NFL, right? If you look at the greatest draft steals of all time, Tom Brady, famously, he played a lot of college football, right? He didn't work out well, obviously, but of course he had the experience, right? We see this all the time. Russell Wilson, of course, famously drafted in the third round by the Seattle Seahawks, played a lot of college football, not a great weekend warrior type, didn't have the great measurables. Lo and behold, he becomes a day one starter, and that's what we're seeing from the Seattle Seahawks. They drafted guys, even though they're rookies, they're so experienced, they can be day one contributors to this football team and help this team win games this season and also build a cheap core for the future as well, like you alluded to, those day three undrafted guys becoming the depth of this football team. And I just want to harp on this point because I think it's very, very important. This does not happen by accident. This is a very clear, concerted strategy. A lot of teams, like you said, they focus on certain characteristics, and that's what they go after. And look, sometimes it works for them. A lot of times it doesn't. But if you draft, this is going to sound really controversial here, if you draft players that can play football and play it at a high level and have played it at a high level, they usually will continue playing football at a high level. And that's what Schneider has done. That's what McDonald has done. And I think the Seattle Seahawks, they're kind of sliding under the radar with the approach this offseason. I think a lot of people look at them and say, transition year, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, they're gone, right? It's going to be kind of interesting to see how things go. It's a tough division, all that kind of stuff. But if you look at what Seattle is doing here, they've set themselves up beautifully for the long term, but they've also done a great job in the short term as well. This is so hard to do, and let's give John Schneider, his staff, Mike McDonald, his staff, a lot of credit. We're seeing great reports out of OTAs, mini camps this time of year already. Obviously, it's early. We'll have to see how it shakes out during training camp, preseason, and of course the regular season. But it's undeniable at this point that Seattle Seahawks are setting themselves up for a lot of success based on a great strategy.